The Aiken-Taylor Award in Modern American Poetry has been given by the Sewanee Review since 1987. Its first recipient was Howard Nemeroff. It was funded by a bequest from Dr. KPAT Taylor, who was the younger brother of the great American poet Conrad Aiken. This year's winner, the 2018 winner Heather McHugh, was in many ways the easiest possible choice. She's a poet who operates on seemingly infinite levels of language, of musicality, of formal invention, of meaning, so that her poems, for us, always seem to play a game of three-dimensional chess. She's in some ways an extraordinarily generous poet, an extraordinarily human poet, but also somebody who's has as lively an intelligence as you'll ever encounter in letters.
You know, I really think of her as a development within a line of great eccentrics in American literature, starting with Dickinson, a little bit homebound, not literally homebound, but a person who is right at home, being at home, I think. Home with her books, home with her thoughts, responding not to the expectations of the world of prizes and the world of publications, but really just to her own imperatives of curiosity and thinking.
There's no way poetry doesn't blunder right into philosophy for me, you know, because the question about it attends it from the very beginning. You know, you start doing it because you sing either nervously or to console yourself, but you wind up in hot water.
In terms of her thrilling leaps of thinking, just how extraordinary it is to follow her from thought to thought, I would say Heather McHugh's strongest precursor would be Emily Dickinson. Maybe she's the key inheritor of Emily Dickinson's work among contemporary poets. She's also, you know, like Dickinson, she's often very almost flirtatious in her poems. Towards the reader, extraordinarily warm towards the reader, as Dickinson often is, or sometimes also very coy. How does McHugh use humor in her poems? Well, I think for one thing, she's as amused by her turns of mind as we are. It goes to her just fundamental improvisational quality, that she'll make discoveries within a poem that are as surprising and thrilling and exciting as they would be, as they are to us as readers. So, you know, oftentimes she'll find a phrase and find a depth within a phrase that has, you know, levels of puns inside it, nested puns inside it. And the humor comes from not only the brilliance of that punning wit, but also the responsiveness that she shows to it in the poems.
The littlest thing, the thing that other people overlook for me, is the whole joy of it. It's some little particle. Seamus Heaney once described me as suspecting language, and that's true. I love it, but I have to suspect it. Etymological dirge, it takes its epigraph from a song you'll recognize. "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear." Calm comes from burning. Tall comes from fast. Comely doesn't come from come. Person comes from mask. The kin of charity is whore. The root of charity is dear. Incentive has its source in song, and winning in the sufferer. Afford yourself what you can carry out. A coward and a coda share a word. We get our ugliness from fear. We get our danger from the Lord. This one, in delighting in particular elements within the dictionary, the ones I noticed that I chose were the ones that, of course, were the least predictable antecedents, that calm should come from a word that also meant burning, originally seems to me strange as hell and still does. That one is very hard for me to sort of put to rest. Or that tall comes from fast. I was walking down a street in Maine one day, and an old salt, it was early in my time there on this island in Maine, and there was an old salt about a block away who, I was walking my dog, and he stopped a field from me, far from me, and yelled at me, "Is that dog ugly?" And I sort of had this impulse to put my hand over the dog's ears and say, well, we don't like to tell him so, you know. But it turned out that he was using a word that was common in a certain little borough of England, or, you know, one of the island pockets of community. And sure enough, I think that may even have occasioned my looking into that dictionary that happened to be at hand, that ugly, that we get our ugliness from fear. That line is a kind of literal rendition of that etymology.
She's monitoring and kind of filtering language as it comes in. Even just talking to her in person casually, I think you'll find that she's picking up on things you've said and spinning them and turning them around and looking at them from all kinds of sides and angles. Sometimes she reminds me, my sons are really into the Rubik's Cube, and sometimes she seems to me like somebody who's almost figuring out a phrase the way you would figure out a Rubik's Cube, by twisting it in all kinds of different directions. Every change you make requires other changes. You have to be able to think in sort of a supernatural way ahead of time, thinking 4 or 5 moves ahead. She has that kind of strategic, verbal strategic brilliance that it's as though with choice A, she's already thought through to choice B and Z down the page. So it is striking how much her imagination comes out of processing very, very current idioms. I mean, I don't know a poet that listens as hard to the very latest in spoken English as McHugh does.
And how do you mean, what do you mean, is on the one hand a question no one should ever dare to answer for himself, and on the other hand a record of how paltry the intentions are.
In the case of this award, the Aiken-Taylor Award for American Poetry, it first of all brings a lot of really interesting people together in one place to think about McHugh's poems, and I think most awards do a version of that. Convening people in actual physical space. But of course, it also convenes readers in virtual space from all around the world who are going to encounter McHugh's poems in the pages of the Swanee Review, maybe for the first time, encounter my essay on her so that there's some guide in how to read her and think about her. And hopefully that trickles down into communities, bookstores, book groups, book clubs, high school syllabi, college syllabi.
I'm going to read the poem Curve. It's a short one. Freezeburn forms whirlpools, and bear fur has curve. My line is gravity's sheer vertical. Memories the same seem. Sail a memo down, there's the spooled reel. Plunge into simulcast. Caught up in the network is a blue planet, spinner par excellence. It's too small. Throw it back.